Hey, welcome back. So last week I released a video on a kit facade that I created for my Laravel Docker environment. And that kit facade really simplifies a lot of the creation and starting and stopping and all of the kind of day-to-day interactions that you have with the Docker environment. I think it's in a good spot. One of the things that was missing was the ability to have multiple environments. As an example, I want to have a development environment that has all of my development services, locally, so I can quickly and easily make code changes. And then I want to have a production environment where maybe my database isn't in a local like MySQL container, but it's in Amazon RDS. So today I'm going to introduce that. So let's get at it. So before we get into the content, so here's the video I released last week on the kit facade. You can see that there. And then there's a previous video that I released on just introducing this Docker kind of starter kit. And I went through all the code. So if you really want to understand, the code and how it's all working and the Docker commands and everything that's going on and how to build your compose file, then this is the video for you. If you just want to learn how to quickly get your project up and running, this is probably the video. And the video today is going to show you how to get not just your local environment or your dev environment running, but we're talking about your production environment. So we kind of support two environments here. And in general, I have a lot of videos over here in the Technology Sandbox. I try to post a video a week. And, there's a lot of videos, for example, if you're just interested in Laravel, a lot of videos on Laravel, a lot of videos on Docker, and, a lot of other. Here's deploying Laravel to AWS. All right, so here is the Docker starter kit. And I've already followed the first step in the quick start. So I've set up a project. I've cloned this repo into a Docker directory under a project directory, and I'm going to show you what I've got so far. So here I am sitting in PHP Storm. I have a project directory. Inside that project directory I have Docker, and because I get cloned, and I have all of the repo here. So down here in the terminal, that gives me access to the kit commands. So I can just type kit and hit enter. It'll give me all of the different kit commands that are available to me. And so you can see things like kit create, kit build, kit start. Covered all those kind of the last time. And what I'm going to do right now is show you some stuff that I didn't cover the last time. So one of the things that you can do here, and this is covered in, not the quick start, because the quick start just gets you up and running quickly, but down here talks about the Docker environment. What we're going to do this first is set up our .env file. So let's go ahead and take care of all of that. So there's no .env file here. I'm just going to copy and I'm going to paste this in and just rename this .env. So now I have a .env file, and this .env file is the Docker environment. So that's what we're looking at here, the Docker environment. I'm going to keep a lot of this the same. The only thing I'm going to do is change some ports down here, but let's go top to bottom again. My app's going to be called abc_app. Here's the app domain. It's going to be that variable right here, which is the same as this. It's going to be abc_app.local. This is the path to the code. This is a change from the last time. So if you're using this kit already, when you update, you may have to move your code manually into a subdirectory under code. And I'll show you where that lands in a second. And here's the repo. So when I call kit create, this is where it's going to go and pull from. If you don't specify a repo here, it's going to pull from the Laravel GitHub. So as an example, if I look up Laravel, here's the default Laravel GitHub. It's going to pull this in, and you get this kind of a brand new Laravel environment. However, if you already have a project that you want to pull in, so for example, I have a Laravel demo project here that I'm going to pull in right here. This is my Laravel demo, and it's pretty close to a standard Laravel. The only thing I changed, depending on the version, I cloned this at one point. The only thing that I added in here was I added a job so that I had a test job that would run once a minute. A couple other things I added was, I created a table to hold kind of places. And so you'll see that in a second. So anyways, this is my Laravel demo. This is the repo. I'm going to go ahead and copy the URL for this repo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in here. This is the repo that I want to clone from. Or when I say kit create, it's going to pull from that. This is a new feature I just added recently, so it wasn't in the last video. Everything else I'm going to stay the same with the same versions. The ports, this is going to be on, just looking at my ports here that I have open. So this application is kind of my local or my dev application. I'm going to put this on all. These are going to be on kind of a port 2, or so I'm going to append a 2 to the end of all the ports. The database is going to go ahead and kind of create a database called abc_app, and it'll put it in there. So I think I've got this environment all set up to go. This is my Docker environment. I'm going to go ahead and we'll close out the example. I'm going to leave that here for now. The other new thing that I have is when I spin up this Docker environment, if you look both at Laravel itself, Laravel has a .env.example, and my Laravel demo has a .env.example. Now, by default, what it's going to do when I create this app is it's going to take that .env.example, it's going to copy it to a .env file, and it's going to replace some of the variables that's in there. That's one behavior that it can have. But a new feature added is in the Laravel environment, I can create these Laravel.env files or Laravel.env.production. I'm going to come back to the prod in a second, but right now I'm going to create this file. So that is in my Docker folder. I'm going to create a new directory called Laravel. And I'm going to create a .env file inside of this directory. Okay, so let's pretend that you have an environment already set. So you already know this. You don't want the kit create to kind of modify or tweak any of these environment variables. So you're just going to drop in a .env file exactly how you want it. So this is already kind of configured. This is a .env file. It's already got the database and everything's all set up exactly how I want it for my development environment. And then what's going to happen is when I run git create, it's going to copy this .env file over to the code directory. And that feature is talked about in this Laravel environment section. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to run the git create command. Here it is. And it has an option where I can force it. So force just, if there's an existing code directory, it's going to delete that first and then it's going to redeploy. We're not going to worry about that at all. We already got the code repo. We talked about that. That's part of the Docker environment. And we just talked about this .env file. So we're going to use that. So let's go back over here and we're going to run our git create command and let it do its work. Okay, so the build is finally completed. I reviewed last time kind of all of the process that it did, but essentially it created a new directory under code in ABC. So now that's a change from the last time. Is now all my code is under subdirectory. So here's this code, and under code then you'll see this abc_app, which is the Laravel application that I just created. It cloned in my Laravel demo project, and again it knew to do that because in my php.env I have the code repo URL specified. After I got done cloning that in, it ran composer install, it ran npm install, it ran npm build, and then towards the end you can see down here it set an application key, started preparing the database, it ran migrations on this, so it got all of the new tables. Actually, here's where it ran npm install, did the installation, and then read npm build. And at the very end, it does a couple of things for you. It ensures that your domain exists in your host file so that you can resolve this on a browser tab, and then it opens up a browser tab for you. And the tab it opened up is this one right here for me, and you can see up here, let me just pump this up a little bit so you can see kind of the results. There's no data first, so let's go ahead and just add a little bit of data. I'm going to use an artisan command for that. Run artisan dbseed. I'm using my kit command, kit artisan dbseed. It'll add some data to my database. I'm going to do it one more time, and just for giggles we'll add another set. So I added, I think 300 maybe, that's what that was. So now when I refresh, the application selects a random point in the world, a lat long, random lat long, and then it finds kind of the closest 10 locations. And these are totally all made up. There's not really a Lake Fanny in Bangladesh there. The other thing that is unique about this application is I took off, we used to say Laracast up here. Now this says the host name, and then it gives the IP address for this host. So that's kind of useful, especially if I'm scaling out horizontally and I have a whole bunch of these, I can see which IP address this is coming from. And we kind of went through all of that last time. There's a few new kind of speckles in there, like the code repo and this Laravel environment. So what I want to do next is talking about like our prod environment, our production environment. So our production environment, a lot of times, if we look at our Docker Compose for our local environment, it has a number of services. It has an Nginx service, it has a PHP service, it has a MySQL service. There's a Composer, Artisan, NPM, PHP unit. So all of these services are available to you in your local environment. Locally we would run, this cron to schedule jobs. Locally we'd run, this Redis server to handle the cache, and it is running right now. I can run my unit tests. I have NPM, Artisan to run Artisan commands. In production, I don't need all these services. So in production, I might want to pare this down. So for example, MySQL, I don't need that running in a Docker container, because in production, I might have this run on AWS, and I have an RDS instance that is a MySQL database run in there. So I don't necessarily have to spin up all of these services. My production environment can be quite a bit different. So with that said, let's talk about production environments. If you notice right here, there's two Docker Compose files. There's a Docker Compose and there's a Docker Compose-prod. So I look at prod. Right now, it's an exact clone of the local environment or dev environment. It doesn't have to be. I'm going to keep this exactly the same, so I have all the services needed to run the application. I don't have locally for example, a database that's a production database that I can access locally. I have an RDS instance that's in the cloud, but it doesn't expose a public IP address, so I have nothing running here. So you'd imagine, though, you would take this and you would modify this to meet your production needs. Okay, so I have this Docker Compose file for my production. I need a Docker environment for production also. I have this Docker environment right here. This is my environment for my local or my dev build. And so what I want to do now is I want to copy this and I'm going to create a .prod for my production. And again, this is not the .env file that goes into your Laravel application. This is the env file for the Docker environment. So up here, some things would change. So for example, the name, I'm just going to underscore prod the name. That'll change this and also this. I'm going to keep the code repo the same. So I'm just going to pull that same code down. Down here for ports, I know this port is not available. That is my development port. So I'm going to put this on a 5 port because I know that's okay. It's going to change my database to abc _app _prod. Keep that same. So all of this is going to be the same. And so now when I hit create, this is the information it's going to use to kind of build the production environment. There's one more .env file I want to make sure I have. Is up here under my Laravel directory. I'm going to copy. This is my development environment. So I'm going to do the same thing. I want to make up .prod environment. And I can make changes to this. So I already know that the app is called that. Here is a .prod. Down here for my database, it's going to be prod, and we're going to leave everything else the same. And obviously this isn't really much of a change from my dev environment, but again, you have to imagine, for example, my database isn't running in a MySQL container. It's actually an RDS instance. Instead of having these endpoints here defined by the container names or the container service name, I would have a URL to that RDS instance. And instead of having a username and a password here, I would use Amazon's secret manager and have those injected into the environment when I build this thing. But for now, you get the idea. So I am mimicking or kind of setting up this example. This is my production environment. So I'm going to come back to my terminal, and instead of running git create, what I'm going to run is git prod create. And I'm going to go ahead and let that run. And we'll come back when it's all complete. All right, so it has completed running the git create command for the prod environment. Let's go through and just visually see here. Obviously, it opened up the browser tab. We can go over here. Here's the new browser tab. This is the dev environment. This is the prod environment. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see them both. I don't have any data in my production environment yet because I didn't add dbseed this thing. We'll dbseed this in a little bit, but you can see my IP address and the name are different than my dev environment. Let's make this the same scale there. There we go. So going back and forth, you can see the kind of the difference there. All right, so we're going to go back to the application, and I'm going to kit artisan db seed, and I'm going to run this a couple of times, but I want to do it in my prod environment. So I want to go kit prod artisan db seed. So I'm seeding the production environment. We'll do that 3 times. So now I should have some data in production. So when I come back here and I refresh, I should see some points down here now. And so now I'm getting locations, and I get locations over here too now. So I got both dev environment and I got the production environment. They're both running now at the same time. Let's take a look at where it put everything here. The code is stored under a new directory. So here's the production directory. Here's the development directory. Under production, you can see down here, there's the .env file. This .env file is the copy of our .env file that we put here in our Docker environment. So that's this without the app key, because the app key got automatically generated for us, but everything else was just copied over. So that's where our production environment lives. Under the database in Docker, you will see 2 directories under data. So data here is the database for the development environment. It's got the abc_app table in there. Here is the database for the prod environment, and you can see the abc_app_prod. If I pull in data grip so I can see, again, a look at the databases, here's abc_app. You can see, for example, I have a places table. In that places table, here's kind of these fake places with a lat long, a name, and kind of the average temperature and all that stuff. Down here is my production environment, and you can see I have that places table, has a different set of data, just randomly generated data. Okay, so now we're in a great spot because now we have the ability to build for our dev environment. We also have the ability to build for our production environment. At some point, I might extend this a little further to include a staging environment, but I probably won't have a video for that, so just kind of be on the lookout. So right now you're in a great spot so that you can edit this Docker Compose file and make this your production environment. And I'll give you some hints on probably what I would do. So again, right now, this is just a direct copy of our development environment because I know that works. But in production, for example, instead of network mapping my code into this container, I probably would copy this directly into the container. So when you have the container itself, the container contains all of the code. To do that, I would need a different PHP Docker file. So down here, you could edit this Docker file and create a php.prod or a php-prod, however you want to name it. And you could come in here, and one of the last things you can do is you can build this whole thing up and then copy the code in directly. So it's kind of part of the image. So those are some changes, for example, on PHP that you might want to do. Again, we already talked about MySQL. This is probably not in your container for production, so you can get rid of that. So another service I have here is Composer. And Composer is because I want to Composer and add new packages or libraries, and I want to Composer update and Composer install. All of those things I want to be able to do in my dev environment. In production, that's not something that you normally would jump in and do in production. So in production, again, I'm going to run Composer install as part of my Docker file. So I would have a php-prod Docker file, and I probably would run it there. You know, kind of the same thing with Artisan. I don't probably need a separate service. If I had to run an Artisan command in production, maybe I'm going to, bring the site down for maintenance. There's an Artisan command for that. So I would use Docker to create a shell access, and I would run PHP Artisan and put the website in maintenance mode. I don't think I need a separate service for that. NPM is the same thing. I don't think I need a separate service for NPM because I'm not going to go in and NPM and add new packages. I'm just not going to do it. So I can get rid of NPM. I would do the initial NPM install and NPM build as part of my Docker file. PHP unit in production, I don't think I'm going to run my unit tests in production. Redis, again, this is probably going to be an external service like Elasticache in production, so I can get rid of this service. Now Horizon's a bit interesting. When I push Laravel out into production, I generally will tweeze apart the web. So I put the web on its own service or its own EC2 instance, and I would put the workers on another EC2 instance or another Docker container. So I may still have this service sticking around because I may want to start PHP Artisan in a separate Docker container. But I can just keep this service and use this. Same thing with cron. Cron, I think, and Horizon, they kind of go hand in hand. Cron is the thing that's putting new jobs on the queue. Horizon's the thing that's pulling jobs off the queue and processing them. So I probably would keep these two things on a separate service. I may push to kind of combine these into one service because cron and Horizon can probably run on the same instance. That's not going to be a problem. So when we're all done in a real production environment, this is going to get slimmed down a lot. I would have my Nginx service. I would have my PHP here. And at some point, depending on where you're at, you may even want to entertain combining these two things into one kind of web app service. Again, this is your production environment. You can go any direction you want. I'm just trying to empower you by giving you, these two different Docker compose files. And then you can kind of split these up to PHP-prod Docker or Nginx-prod, however you want to go. But I think at this point, you are empowered to kind of go your own direction and build your own production environment. All right, so that completes everything I wanted to cover in this video. I think we're in a pretty good spot right now. So there's a couple of videos I have planned that are coming up where I want to springboard off of what we have. So we're going to take the features we have, like being able to create these images, and then we're going to start to create our CI/CD pipeline, our DevOps, all these kind of capabilities where I want to be able to build an image. I want to be able to publish that or push that image over to a Docker repository, whether that's Docker Hub or Amazon ECR. And then I want to be able to deploy a Docker image from that repository into production. And then we can start talking about things like scaling, having multiple deployments and all of that stuff later on. So that's what's coming up in the future. If you like content like this, hit that like button and subscribe.